The exchange
Ben
program
senin kraliçe
documentation
olduğunu
arrived
bilmiyordum.
on a Tuesday, which was the day that the colony's administrative relay processed the previous week's
Ben senin
non-urgent
kraliçe olduğunu
communications,
bilmiyordum.
and it arrived in the form that institutional documentation of this kind reliably took, thorough in the categories it had been designed to address and brief in the categories that the designers had not anticipated needing to address. Kale read it at the infrastructure monitoring station between the morning's secondary filtration check and the afternoon supply chain review. With the specific mode of reading he applied to administrative documentation, which was efficient and complete, and which produced, when the document had been read, an accurate understanding of what the document said, and a residual sense of what the document had not said. What it said. The Sorvith Cultural Exchange Program was a bilateral initiative between the Human Consortium's frontier communities and the Velthari Cultural Heritage Commission, designed to strengthen mutual understanding between the two civilizations through direct community engagement. Participating frontier settlements would host 1 to 3 Velthari cultural representatives for periods of 4 to 8 weeks. Hosts would be community members who had applied voluntarily and who met the basic participation criteria, which were stable local residents of at least 3 years, professional engagement that provided natural access to the community's daily functions, and demonstrated willingness to engage with genuine curiosity rather than performed hospitality. He had applied because the third criterion was the first criterion he had encountered in any institutional documentation that described a quality he recognized as his own. He was genuinely curious. This was the honest description of his relationship with new things, including people, and the application had been a natural consequence of recognizing that the program wanted what he actually was rather than what institutional programs usually asked for, which was the performance of welcome. What the document had not said, anything specific about who the cultural representatives actually were, beyond the designation ceremonial representative of the Sorvith cultural tradition, which communicated the category and not the content. He filed this gap in the category of things he would understand when the understanding became available, and he returned to the secondary filtration check. Velindra arrived at Varath's landing on a Thursday, on the standard weekly transit connection from the corridor hub, in the company of 2 attendants who were described in the program's arrival documentation as cultural protocol support staff, and who were, in Kale's direct observation at the transit docking section, very good at occupying space in the specific way of people whose professional role was to be present without being noticed. Velindra herself occupied space differently. Not dramatically, she was not imposing in the physical sense that the Velthari cultural representatives he had expected, based on nothing specific, to be imposing. She was of medium height for Velthari, which made her slightly taller than him, with the long swept-back ears that were the Velthari's specific difference from human appearance, and that she wore with the unconscious ease of someone for whom they were simply what she looked like. She was dressed in the working quality of the exchange program's participant guidelines, rather than the formal quality of the cultural documentation's implied ceremonial significance, and she moved through the docking section with the specific, quiet attentiveness of someone who was receiving the environment fully rather than assessing it efficiently. She extended her hand in the greeting protocol she had clearly prepared, the human handshake, executed with the specific quality of something learned rather than instinctive, which produced in him the specific warmth that careful preparation produced when it was preparation made out of genuine consideration rather than performance. "I'm Velindra," she said. Her standard was good, precise, slightly formal in the register of someone who had learned the language thoroughly rather than conversationally. "Kale Soren," he said, "welcome to Varath's landing." She looked at him with the complete, receiving attention that he would come to recognize as her specific quality in all contexts, and she said, "What is that?" indicating the object in his other hand, which was the lunch he had been eating when the transit notification had reminded him He was supposed to be at the docking section. "Bread," he said, "from the colony's central kitchen. It looks different from the documentation images of human bread," she said. "It's frontier bread," he said. "Different resource constraints from what the documentation images were made with." "Does it taste different?" He held it out. "Try it." She looked at the offered bread with the expression of someone who was recalibrating a set of expectations she had arrived with. And then she took a piece and ate it with the direct, honest attention of someone who was receiving the experience rather than evaluating it. And she said, "Yes, it tastes different. Is there bread you make yourself, or does it all come from the central kitchen?" "The central kitchen covers about 80%, he said. "I make bread on weekends when I have time." "What does that taste like?" "Different," he said. "Better, I think, but I'm not objective." She looked at him with the complete, receiving attention. "I'd like to try both," she said, "and form my own assessment." He looked at her for a moment with the honest attention he brought to things that were interesting, and thought that the exchange program had, in the specific way of institutional initiatives that occasionally produced exactly what they intended, produced something better than he had expected. "All right," he said. "Weekend is 4 days away. You'll have the comparison by then." They walked from the docking section to the colony's housing district, and she asked 4 more questions before they reached the housing unit he had prepared, each of which was the question behind the obvious question. Not what is the colony's population, but how many people know each other here. Not what is the primary industry, but what would stop working first if something went wrong. He answered all of them directly, because they were direct questions and they deserved direct answers, and because the alternative, the managed, hospitable version of the answers, would have been a reduction of questions that were better than that. The water reclamation system was Cale's longest-running professional relationship, in the sense that it had been the primary object of his working attention for 11 of his 12 years on Verath's Landing, and that he had developed, across those 11 years, the specific, intimate knowledge of a system that he understood not just in its documentation, but in its personality, the particular quirks of the secondary filtration array, the specific behavior of the pressure regulators in cold season conditions, the 3 workarounds that the maintenance team had developed for equipment that was technically functional and practically imperfect, and that the colony's resource allocation had not yet prioritized for replacement. Vailindra accompanied him through the reclamation facility on the 3rd day, which was earlier than the program's suggested timeline for infrastructure engagement, and which was her suggestion rather than his. She had asked on the 2nd morning what he was doing that day, and he had said he was doing the weekly reclamation system check, and she had said she would like to come, and he had said all right, and she had come. She moved through the facility with the attentiveness that characterized everything she did, not the attentiveness of evaluation, but the specific, receiving quality of someone who was learning the shape of a thing. She asked about the primary filtration first, which was the system's most visible and most functional component, and he explained it, and she understood the explanation and asked 3 follow-up questions that indicated she had understood it completely. Then she asked about the secondary array, which was the system's oldest component and its most troublesome, and he explained the secondary array's specific failure modes and the monitoring protocol he had developed to catch early warning signs, and she asked, "What does it do when it's about to fail? Is there a specific behavior before the failure?" "Pressure variance in the output line," he said. "Not dramatic. The automated monitoring doesn't flag it at the levels I watch for, because the flagging threshold was set when the array was new, and the threshold that matters now is lower. So I do a manual check at the lower threshold once a week." "The documentation doesn't reflect what you know," she said. "The documentation was accurate when it was written," he said. "The system has changed. Documentation doesn't always update at the same pace the knowledge updates." She considered this with the thinking quality she brought to information that reorganized something she had understood before. "Is that common? in frontier infrastructure. It's common everywhere, he said. The people doing the work develop knowledge faster than the records that document the knowledge. The gap is usually managed by having the same people doing the work long enough that the knowledge doesn't need to be in the records because it's in the person. And when the person leaves, then you hope they wrote down enough, he said, or you relearn it from the system's behavior. She was quiet for a moment in the thinking stillness. That's a fragile system, she said. Yes, he said. Most systems are. She nodded with the honest acknowledgement of someone receiving an accurate description. She spent the remainder of the facility visit examining the 3 workarounds that the maintenance team had developed. Jasa, the team's senior technician, explained them with the specific pride of someone who had solved problems creatively under resource constraints, and Velindra asked Jasa questions with the same direct, receiving quality she brought to everything. And Jasa, who was not a person who warmed to strangers quickly, and who had a professional skepticism toward exchange program visitors that she had expressed to Kale before Velindra's arrival, was visibly less skeptical by the end of the visit. She asks the real questions, Jasa said to Kale afterward in the evaluation register she used for technical assessments. Not the ones she thinks she's supposed to ask, the real ones. Yes, he said. That's not nothing, Jasa said, and returned to the secondary filtration array. The 6 weeks had the quality of time that passed when interesting things were happening, not quickly, because interesting things did not require speed, but with the specific density of days that had more in them than the day's calendar had scheduled. Velindra accompanied him through the transit infrastructure review, where she asked about load-bearing assumptions, through the supply chain logistics assessment, where she asked about dependency chains and what would happen to them if the 3rd transit connection was disrupted, through the colony's agricultural monitoring, where she asked the farmer who showed them around about which crops failed first in bad seasons and why those specifically. She asked Kale about Earth in the evenings, when the day's work was done, and they had the specific quality of time that frontier settlements produced in the late evening. The quiet hours when the colony's sounds settled into the ambient drone of the life support systems, and the infrastructure that ran through the night, and when the quality of conversation was different from the daytime quality in the way of conversations that had no agenda. She asked about Earth in the mode of someone who was building an understanding from the ordinary details rather than the significant ones, not the geography and the history and the geopolitical structure, which she had clearly studied. The specific ordinary things. What did people eat in the mornings? Did they eat together or separately? Was there a difference between how people ate when they had time and when they didn't? What did children learn first, reading or numbers? And did that vary by culture? Was there a difference in how people in dense cities treated strangers compared to how people in places like Varath's Landing did? And if so, what was the difference? He answered these questions in the honest, specific mode that her questions invited, without managing the answers for impressiveness or for diplomatic relevance. He told her that frontier settlements tended to produce a specific kind of immediate practical solidarity. People helped strangers on Varath's Landing because strangers on Varath's Landing were a small category, and because the colony's conditions were such that not helping someone who needed it had practical consequences that the community felt. He told her that cities produced a different kind of solidarity, less immediate, more institutional, rooted through the structures that cities developed because direct community accountability was less available at city scale. Neither was better, he said. They were different solutions to the same problem, which was how people who did not know each other managed to share space. She listened to this with the complete, receiving attention. The exchange program documentation describes frontier communities as likely to be cautious toward outsiders, she said. It prepares participants for wariness. Some communities are, he said. The wariness usually comes from previous experiences with outsiders who came for something extractive, resource surveys, administrative compliance reviews, That kind of thing. People who showed up with an agenda. You weren't wary, she said. You weren't extractive, he said. You were asking about bread. She held his gaze for a moment in the quality of someone who is filing something carefully. And if I had been extractive, she said. He thought about this honestly. Then I would have been wary, he said. I'm not unwary by default. I'm wary when the situation warrants it. You asked about bread and then about the failure modes of my filtration system. That's not the pattern of someone who came for something they're not saying. What is it the pattern of? She said. Someone who's genuinely curious, he said, which is what the program said you were so. She was quiet in the thinking stillness for a moment. The program described me as a ceremonial representative, she said. It did, he said. But the bread question was on day 1 and the filtration failure mode question was on day 3, and neither of those is what ceremonial representatives usually ask about. What do ceremonial representatives usually ask about? She said. Cultural signifiers, he said. Traditions. Things that produce good documentation. The exchange program has been running for 4 years and I've read the previous participants' reports. They mostly asked about festivals and community history and what people do to celebrate things. Those are important things, she said. They are, he said. They're not the same as asking what breaks first. She looked at him for a long moment in the complete, receiving attention. No, she said, they're not. He made the weekend bread on Saturday, as promised, and she tried both versions with the same direct, honest attention she brought to everything and gave him her assessment, which was. The central kitchen bread was more consistent, and the bread he made was better. And the difference was the specific quality that came from someone making something for themselves rather than for adequacy, and she wanted the recipe. He gave her the recipe. He did not think about this later as a significant moment, because it was not a significant moment. It was a recipe, exchanged between two people who. The transit monitoring system's alert came through at 6:14 on a Tuesday morning, which was the day of the week that Kale processed the colony's infrastructure alerts in the order of their priority classification. And the alert was classified as observation, non-standard traffic pattern, rather than anything more urgent, which was accurate for the information the monitoring system had at 6:14. By 07:30, the classification had been updated 3 times. He was at the Water Reclamation Monitoring Station, completing the secondary filtration check, when his communications unit produced the colony-wide notification that the Administrative Council had issued. He read it with the specific, absorbing attention of someone who was reading information that was changing what he understood about the situation it described. 17 vessels. Sorvith configuration. Imperial approach protocols. Request for preparation of formal ceremony honoring the sovereign presence. He read this twice. He was aware of Velindra in his peripheral attention. She was at the secondary filtration system's output display, examining the readings with the focus she brought to it on the facility visits. And she had the specific quality of someone who was aware that he was reading the notification, and who was, in that awareness, producing the patience of someone who has been waiting for something, and who is now waiting for its arrival, rather than for its possibility. He looked at her, she was still looking at the output display. Velindra, he said. Yes, she said without turning. The colony just received an Imperial advance communication, he said. I know, she said. The communication requests preparation for a ceremony honoring the sovereign presence, he said. Yes, she said. He was quiet for a moment, in the specific quiet of someone who is assembling information into a picture that the information, assembled, produces. The sovereign presence, he said. That's the title the imperial court uses for the empire's ruling authority. It is, she said. Are you the sovereign presence? He said. She turned from the output display. She looked at him with the complete, undistributed attention. Not the receiving attention of someone taking in information, but the attending attention of someone who is present to a significant moment and who is being fully present to it. Yes, she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. The monitoring station had the ambient sounds it always had, the secondary filtration's output hum, the pressure regulator's periodic adjustment tone, the specific acoustic quality of a room full of working infrastructure. "You're the ruler of the Velthari Empire," he said. "Yes," she said. "The entire empire," he said, because the honest processing of significant information sometimes required the repetition of its elements. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for another moment. "Okay," he said. "I need to do the manual pressure check on the secondary array before we talk about this, because if I don't do it now, I'll have to come back to it and the conversation will be interrupted." She looked at him for a moment with the expression he had seen before, the expression of someone who has received a response they did not anticipate and who is finding it worth something. "All right," she said. He did the manual pressure check. The readings were within the range he monitored, no early warning signs this week. He logged the check in the monitoring record with the accurate notation of the readings and the date and the time. He put down the monitoring equipment. "Okay," he said, "tell me." She told him, in the direct, honest mode that had been the mode of all 6 weeks of their conversations, without managing the telling for the impact of its elements. She was Queen Vailindra Sorvith, the proper full designation, which he had been given the truncated version of for 6 weeks, and which, in the full version, contained the imperial title that the truncated version had been stripped of. She was the 37th ruler of the Velthari Empire, in the 14th year of her reign. The cultural exchange program was a genuine initiative that she had supported from its beginning, and her participation in it was genuine in the sense that she had come to Varath's landing with the genuine purpose of understanding what the program was producing, not from the administrative reports, which she had read, but from the direct experience of being a participant. "The program's reports are good," she said. "They document what the participants observed and what the exchanges produced. They don't document what the exchanges felt like from the inside, how people actually treated the participants, not in the formal sense of hospitality protocols, but in the specific sense of how they talked to them, what they asked, whether they made the adjustment that people make when they know they're being watched by someone important." "The adjustment," he said. "You know the one," she said. "The quality of interaction that occurs when the person you're talking to understands that you have power over something they care about. The way conversations change when the person asking questions could affect your assessment, your resources, your standing." "The managed version," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have been receiving the managed version of interactions for 14 years. It is the dominant mode of communication with the empire's ruling authority. Most people are not aware they're doing it. It is not usually a conscious calculation. It is the instinctive adjustment of behavior in proximity to power." He thought about 6 weeks of conversations and bread and water reclamation failure modes and the specific, direct quality of all of it. "You wanted to know what it looked like without the adjustment," he said. "I wanted to know how humans in frontier settlements interacted with someone from the Sorvith culture when there was nothing to be gained from treating them well," she said. "When the person asking about bread was just the person asking about bread." "And," he said, she looked at him with the complete attention. "You gave me the bread," she said, "and then you told me it was probably biased because you'd made it yourself." "That was just accurate," he said. "Yes," she said, "it was." He was quiet for a moment in the honest processing mode. "The bread assessment," he said, "the filtration failure modes, the supply chain dependency chains, Earth and cities and how people treat strangers." "All of it," she said. "You were asking the same question across all of it," he said. "I was," she said. "What it's like," he said. "Ordinary specifically." "What it's like," she confirmed. "From the inside, not the program's documentation of what it's like. What it actually is." He thought about this. He thought about 11 questions about Earth, and the conversations in the late evening quiet and Joss's assessment that she asked the real questions. And he thought about the recipe he had given her on Saturday, and about the 43 days of a person who had been curious about everything ordinary, and who had not, in 43 days, asked a single question that he had identified as the managed question, the question designed to produce the answer that served an agenda. "What did you find?" he said. She told him what she had found in the direct language that she had used for 43 days and that she was using now, which was the same language in the same register, unchanged by the arrival of the ships and the ceremony protocols and the Administrative Council's emergency session, and the specific, significant weight of the truth that the telling was carrying. She had found, she told him this carefully, because she was being careful with what she had found in the way of someone who understood that the findings were significant and who wanted to convey them accurately rather than impressively, that the specific quality of interaction she had been looking for was present, and that it was present not as a special quality of Verath's landing or of him specifically, but as the quality of what happened when the interaction was genuinely ordinary, when neither person in the conversation was managing for the power dynamic, when the questions were real and the answers were real, and the gap between what was said and what was meant was the normal gap of ordinary communication, the gap produced by the limits of language rather than by the filter of strategic management. She had found Jasa, who asked real questions and expected real answers, and who had assessed Vailindra as asking the real questions in the register of a technical evaluation, which was the highest compliment Jasa offered, and which had been offered without any understanding of who Jasa was offering it to. She had found the reclamation system and its secondary filtration array, and the specific, honest documentation of how the system actually behaved versus how its documentation described it behaving, which was, she told him this with the direct attention, a useful metaphor for what she had been looking for. The documentation of the bilateral relationship between the Velthari Empire and the human consortium was accurate in its formal elements and insufficient in its quality elements, in the same way that the reclamation system's documentation was accurate for when it was written and insufficient for the system's actual current behavior. She had found the weekend bread. "I want to tell you something specific," she said, "and I want to be clear that I'm telling you this as information rather than as something that requires a response." "All right," he said. "The cultural exchange program will be expanded," she said. "The administrative decision has been in process for 6 months, and my participation here was part of the information gathering for that decision. The expansion will significantly increase the program's scope and resources and the number of participating frontier settlements." She paused. "The decision would have been made in the same direction regardless of what I found here, because the program's aggregate documentation supports the expansion. What I found here will affect how the expansion is structured. The specific emphasis on the quality of interaction the program aims to produce rather than the quantity of exchanges it documents." He looked at her steadily. "The real questions over the documented ones," he said. "Yes," she said. "The filtration failure mode questions over the festival documentation." She paused. "You said most systems are fragile. You said the fragility was in the gap between the knowledge in the person and the documentation. The bilateral relationship has the same fragility. The documentation of the exchange program produces reports. The quality of the actual exchanges produces something different, and the something different is what the program's expansion needs to be designed for." "What does it produce?" he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "The specific experience of being in an ordinary conversation with someone from a genuinely different background," she said, "and finding that the ordinary conversation is possible, not managed, not performed, ordinary." She paused. "That experience is not in the documentation. It's in the people who have had it, and the people who have had it carry it differently than they carried the bilateral relationship before they had it." He thought about this. He thought about 43 days and the specific quality of those days, the quality of time that had more in it than the calendar had scheduled, And he thought about what he was carrying from those days that he had not been carrying before them, which was the specific, present knowledge of a person who was genuinely curious, and who asked the real questions, and who ate frontier bread with the direct, honest attention of someone receiving the experience rather than evaluating it. You carry it too, he said, not just the people who have had it with you in the exchange program. She looked at him with the complete attention. You've been having the ordinary conversation for 6 weeks, he said. That's not nothing from the other direction. She was quiet for a moment in the thinking stillness, the specific stillness he had learned to recognize as the quality of her genuine engagement with an idea rather than the processing quality of someone managing a response. No, she said, it's not. The bread recipe, he said. I have it, she said. It'll work better with the grain from the colony's agricultural station than with the corridor hub supply, he said. The moisture content is different. You'll need to adjust the water ratio by about 10%. She looked at him for a moment with the expression he knew, the expression of someone who has received an unexpected response and who is finding it worth something. And then she said, in the specific quiet of someone who has been in 43 days of genuine conversation, and who is, in this moment, in the same kind. I'll note that. The ceremony arrived in the late afternoon. The formal convoy's advance team with the Imperial Protocol staff, and the specific, significant weight of the Velthari Empire at its most ceremonially present, which was a quality that the colony of 12,000 people had not encountered before, and that it encountered now, with the specific, wide-eyed quality of a community that was understanding something it had not been prepared to understand. The Administrative Council was managing the logistics with the professional composure of people doing an unprecedented thing, and doing it correctly through the specific combination of institutional instinct and real-time adaptation that unprecedented things required. Kale watched the preparation from the edge of the colony's central square, with the observer's professional attention of someone who was assessing a logistical operation and finding it, in the broad strokes, competent. Velindra, Queen Velindra, the proper designation that he was still calibrating to, moved through the ceremony's preparation with the quality he had seen her move through everything. Present, attentive, the specific unhurried focus of someone who was in the correct place doing the correct thing. She had exchanged the exchange program's working attire for the formal dress of the imperial court, which was different from the working attire in the way that very significant things were different from the things that preceded them. Recognizably the same person, carrying something additional that the new context had placed on them. She found him at the edge of the square before the ceremony began, in the interval that the preparation always produced between the readiness and the event. I want to tell you one more thing, she said, in the direct, quiet register that was her private register rather than the formal one. All right, he said. I came to Varath's landing in the way I came, she said, because the specific question I needed answered could not be answered otherwise. I want you to know that the concealment was a choice I made about the conditions of the observation, and not a choice I made about you specifically. You didn't have information that would have let you make different choices about how to treat me. She paused. You made the choices you made with the information you had. He thought about this honestly. I would have made the same choices, he said, with the full information. She looked at him. I know, she said, that's what I found. He thought about what to say and found, in the honest assessment of the moment, that the thing worth saying was the thing he had been thinking since the monitoring station's conversation. The thing that the 43 days had produced in him, that was not a response to who she was but a response to who she had been in those 43 days, which was the same thing, and which he was now understanding. The secondary filtration array, he said. The output readings this morning were normal, but the pressure variance trend over the past 3 weeks has been moving in a direction I want to watch. I'd normally catch it in another 2 weeks if it continues the pattern. She looked at him with the expression of someone who is receiving something that is both entirely unexpected and entirely legible. "I'm telling you," he said, "because you asked about the failure modes on day 3, and because if the array has a problem in the next 6 months, the colony will need a maintenance priority review. And the cultural exchange program expansion presumably involves continued contact with Verath's landing, and it would be useful for the contact to include someone who knows that the secondary filtration array is something to watch." "I see," she said. "It probably won't fail," he said, "but probably is not certainly." "No," she said, "it isn't." She held his gaze with a complete, undistributed attention. "I'll note the array in the program's operational contact record. The real questions over the documented ones," he said. "The filtration failure modes," she confirmed. "The ceremony's convening signal came from the protocol staff." She turned toward it with the specific, composed quality of someone returning to the significant role that the significant occasion required. And he could see this. In the honest accounting of what the 43 days had taught him to see herself in the formal register, in the same way she had been herself in the working register. Which was the specific quality of people who had been who they were for long enough that the register did not change what they were, only how it was expressed. She paused before the square's edge and turned back to him. "The recipe," she said, 10% water adjustment for the agricultural station grain." "Yes," he said. "I'll try it," she said, "and I'll send you the assessment." He thought about the assessment arriving, the specific, direct quality of it, in the mode she brought to everything she observed, and thought that it would be accurate and honest and probably contain at least one question he had not thought to anticipate. "I look forward to it," he said. She nodded with the economy of someone for whom a nod was a complete statement, and turned to the ceremony. And the ceremony was what it was, the full, significant weight of the Velthari Empire present in a frontier colony of 12,000 people, who watched it with the wide-eyed quality of people who were understanding that their ordinary Tuesday had become something else. Cale watched from the square's edge and thought about 43 days and bread and filtration failure modes, and the specific quality of time that passed when interesting things were happening. The density of days that had more in them than the calendar had scheduled. He thought about what he was carrying from those days, which was not the weight of the ships or the ceremony or the imperial title, but the specific, present knowledge of a person who had asked about bread on day 1 and about failure modes on day 3, and who had brought the same quality of attention to both, and who had turned from the ceremony's threshold to confirm the water adjustment ratio, which was the kind of person that the 43 days had shown him she was, and which was, in the honest accounting that honest accounting always produced, the most significant thing the 43 days had contained. He was still the civil infrastructure coordinator of Verath's landing. He had a filtration array to watch, and a supply chain to manage, and a secondary pressure trend to monitor for the next 6 weeks. He went back to the monitoring station because the work was the work, and the work did not wait, and the assessment would arrive when it arrived. He thought, looking forward to the questions it contained.